So we finished our conversation. The absorptive state and regulation. Yeah, few words on immune intake regulation and metabolism regulation is going to be very basic. Hypothalamus, people. Okay, there are several nuclei in the hypothalamus that are responsible for it. Okay, so you don't have to memorize those nuclei. Come on. There are, like, this arcuate nucleus is perhaps the most important part of the regulation of the appetite. Okay, so they receive the info from the vagus nerve regarding the stretch of the stomach and stretch of the intestine. They receive information from chemoreceptors. Okay, and of course, partially, well, to a large extent, regulation involves leptin, ghrelin, and insulin. Okay, so the short-term signals mainly come directly from GI tract. So it's either stretch, when you eat something, your stomach becomes distended. Stomach becomes distended, it sends the inhibitory signals to the hypothalamus. Okay, distension, inhibitory signals to hypothalamus. Elevated levels of glucose and amino acids in the blood, elevated levels of free fatty acid. All of it is associated with the consumption of food, right? Elevated levels of CCK, cholecystokinin, secretin, insulin. All of it inhibits appetite as well. So we're talking about hormones. Okay. And of course, chemical inputs like this. Pretty much, you see that mechanical, chemical, and hormonal stimuli that are the results of food consumption will suppress your appetite. Of course, they work differently. Say, proteins produce more significant response than carbohydrates. And it actually plugs in really well. I really like these discussions, to talk about the appetite regulation and obesity. There was a study done in high school children. I think it was like Arizona or Texas. So what they've done, they compared two groups of kids. One group received substantial amount of protein during breakfast. Another one didn't. They did not control that much for calorie intake, but it turned out that kids that received protein during breakfast, they consumed less calories during the day and overall demonstrated better body weight control. So it's like an important point. Eat protein in the morning. Hunger hormones, ghrelin, glucagon, epinephrine. When you're stressed, okay, these are produced except for glucagon. Well, glucagon is produced when your carbohydrate levels are low, you're starving. But ghrelin is the hormone of hunger, okay? Epinephrine is the hormone of stress. And what's interesting, epinephrine and glucagon, they both will increase blood glucose. Both of them, right? Remember we talked about it. Glucagon is normally increases blood glucose, and epinephrine will increase blood glucose too. And cortisol will increase blood glucose too. And you know what is the reason for it? They'll bind to the similar receptors. They have similar structures and bind to the same receptors. Now, what essentially happens in obesity is that constant stimulation of hypothalamus with satiety signals, as we mentioned before, leads to the resistance leptin resistance mostly. So people become refractory to those signals, and leptin stays elevated for a long period of time in patients with obesity. And actually, some of the studies which went, I'd be honest with you, went completely over my head. So let me put it this way, so we can talk about obesity a little bit. Obesity is the big problem, okay? Now, if you read the most trustworthy, well, there are two most trustworthy news sources in the United States. One is the National Enquirer, another one is the Onion website. So, according to the Onion, the reason why people overeat is because they are weak. Their willpower is non-existent. That's basically true. Okay. So, the studies of obesity, funded very well, but to be honest, the main reason for obesity is that we eat more than we should. We eat more than we spend. Now, of course, it's kind of common sense to say, oh, you gotta eat less and move around more, and that is absolutely true, but you can basically divide obesity studies to three, I would say, big categories. One is socioeconomic basics of obesity. For instance, multiple times it was demonstrated that people who live in more stressful environments are more prone to obesity. It has a so obesity is inversely correlated, say, with the household income. Not only because people with higher household income have more spare time that they can use for exercising, but also because they experience less stress in the regular life, on average. On average, of course, on average. There was study, really nice correlation of people who live in the inner cities compared to people who live in suburbia. In China, there was a great study. I think it was fantastic. If you think Cleveland is the big city, no, it's not. Study of people who live, I think, in Beijing and Shanghai. It's like tens of millions of people. They showed that the length of commute is positively correlating with obesity. Because it's stressful. If you ever took a subway, you know it is. So that's one study. Another study, dietary regulation. More palatable food is not coincidentally processed food. What is better, like the high protein, high fat, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. And the third type of diet is hardcore neuroscience. So basically, that third type of studies tries to understand how this works, how these nuclei in hypothalamus work. Can we design a drug that will suppress the appetite? Does that make sense? And honestly, a lot of it is, it's a complex problem that cannot be solved by a single drug. And cannot be solved by a simple statement, because my son got a really nice phrase yesterday night. He said, this phrase is like, if you're depressed, start smiling, find some friends. He said, well, analogy of it, you're tired of living in the dumps? Well, earn money, buy a house. That's pretty much the same idea. It's not that easy. It's not an easy transition. From one due to many underlying causes. Wanted to say something. Oh, regarding the obesity, before we get to basal metabolic rate, there's a great study in obesity. I just wanted to share. It was done in Louisiana. Where else? Louisiana, the state motto. Thank God there's Mississippi. So Louisiana is usually the second or first state in terms of obesity rates. Thank God for Mississippi. So there was a study in Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge. They wanted to see what inflammatory changes accompany weight gain. Not long term, but the short term. So they assembled a group of people, a few dozens, students, LSU, where else. And for 2 months, it was a very simple study. For 2 months, each participant received 4,000 calories a day, which sounds like a reasonable amount. The reward for participate, and it was free. They had to come to the clinic and have their breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The clinic, they were not restricted in terms of the exercise. They could exercise all they wanted. And they were not restricted in terms of the meals out of the study. So, I mean, if you want to get a pack of M&Ms, go ahead. And the reward was 4 months free gym membership in one, like fanciest gyms in Baton Rouge. So, first results came pretty early. The first result was it's almost impossible to eat 4,000 calories a day voluntarily. For a normal person, if you're not Michael Phelps, pretty much. They ended up locking people in the room with a nurse. And nurse did not let them out until they finished the meal. I'm not kidding. So they just had to eat the whole thing. Every bite, okay? Some people dropped out of the race. They said that it's disgusting. Pretty much, fuck your membership, okay? And the vast majority of participants, when they were surveyed at the end of the study, they checked the line, please do not contact me about any other clinical studies. The effects were very interesting. So all participants gained weight over a span of 2 months. The range was from 5 to 20 pounds, which is a lot. And you would expect that the dramatic weight gain would be accompanied by metabolic disturbances in, say, insulin resistance and glucose tolerance and hormone levels and inflammatory mediators levels. The short answer, no, it wasn't. They did not see any significant change of any parameter in that group of participants. Yes, there was slight increase in leptin. That's about it. Seriously, that's about it. Which kind of, I think, is a good news, because when the Christmas is over, you know that all those inflammatory mediators still okay. You know, you got whatever number of pounds. My personal record is 20 over 2 weeks, but I was in Louisiana. And I was pretty much eating for 2 weeks, nonstop. So, but that's it. Okay. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about body temperature, BMR. So what's basal metabolic rate? It's real easy to measure. Lay down flat, don't do squat for 24 hours. And they're fancy machine. I think it kind of measures the amount of heat that you produces, then extrapolates things, because it's pretty much known what is the effectiveness of cellular respiration, so it can extrapolate. Basically, for a male, it's 1 kilocalorie per kilogram per day. Okay? For female, it's 0.9. So if you want to measure, so what's the, no, it's not per, 1 kilocalorie per kilogram per, wait a minute. No, it cannot be so. It's not per day. Per hour. Per hour, not per day, per hour. So you take 80 kilogram male, multiply by 24 hours, gives you about 2,000 calories. You get, say, 50 kilogram female, which is 120, well, a little bit less than 120 pounds. It gives you 1,200 calories. Okay. Again, it's approximate. So what increases BMR? Thyroxine, thyroid hormone first. Body surface. Higher body surface and body weight increases BMR. Some tissues are more metabolically active, so muscle mass, elevated muscle mass increases BMR. Basically, if you weigh 300 pounds and you are an NFL linebacker, or you just weigh 300 pounds, that's different types of BMR. Okay? So the more muscle mass, muscle is more protein, increases BMR. Old age, lower BMR. Gender, that's normal gender differences. Females have lower BMR, but you have to appreciate that. When we compare male and female, we presume that we compare male and female with the same body composition. Does that make sense? Like, if you compare an average male with a female athlete will have higher BMR because of the high percentage of muscle mass. Body temperature. The higher the temperature, the higher the BMR. Okay? Stress increases BMR, oxygen consumption. Exercise increases BMR. Proteins increase BMR. The most active, muscles during the exercise, okay? For instance, now, when I'm standing, the muscles that work in me are some of the back muscles and leg muscles. And they don't work really hard, just to stabilize my body, okay? During the exercise, muscle metabolism prevails. Other than that, kidneys, when we will think about it, what happens in the kidneys? Filtration, that's first step, and then reabsorption. There's a lot of active transport involved, which means a lot of ATP is used. That's why they're metabolically active. Liver, a lot of metabolic processes. Okay, so a lot of ATP is used. Brain just normally uses a lot of ATP. And finally, heart. It's basically the only muscle in your body that constantly, rhythmically contracts. So also very metabolically active. Does that make sense? So they're responsible. Now, let's talk about the regulation of body temperature. I learned a lot, so I'm going to share that knowledge with you. What's the normal body temperature? 37. Actually, it is considered to be normal between Fahrenheit, 95 to 100.4. Be reasonable. 100.395 doesn't mean that you don't have fever. Okay? Do you understand what I'm saying? 100.4 is somewhat, so it corresponds to 38 degrees Celsius. Everything above, in Celsius, everything above 38 degrees Celsius is considered to be fever. Am I clear? So basically, if you have a child, how do you measure temperature? I know so much now. How do you measure temperature? Come on. How do you measure temperature? Under your tongue. Where else? Rectal? Okay, rectal. Where else? Huh? An axillary? Where else? Huh? You mean skin? Yeah, yeah. Which one? What's the best? Rectal. Why? Yeah, it's true. Core temperature. Okay. Under the tongue is okay. Just don't do it in that sequence, like rectal first and then under the tongue. Just, or at least clean it. Actually, there is another method that is used in the clinic. It's rare, but if there's a need to take temperature really precise, there's an esophageal probe. It is dropped in the esophagus. Of course, the patient is numbed, but it is really accurate. Because there are two temperatures, core and shell. Shell temperature can be very low. It can be 22 degrees Celsius, and you can be up and running. I mean, probably not for a long time, but you're going to be up and running. Core temperature is what we care about. So, what is the problem? What is the danger of very much elevated temperature? There's no evidence that high temperature will make your brain melt. Seriously, there's no evidence that experiencing fever like 106 will kill your brain. More likely is that elevated temperature will destroy enzymes in other cells. Say if it destroys, inactivates enzymes in the red blood cells, and red blood cells kidneys start to die. If kidneys shut down just because of the fever, you develop, the body-wide toxemia. Does that make sense? So it's more like a diffused breakdown of enzymes. Does that make sense? So 43, I can't really. 70. So 104, it is 104 Fahrenheit, it's 40 degrees Celsius. So yeah, 110. I mean, you have to be really concerned at 104. It's really bad. But you have to understand that fever is the normal response to inflammation, disease. Really. Okay? Now, cooling is much less dangerous. When people are exposed to surgery, often they cool down, substantially cool down. One of the interesting treatments that, of course, I cannot spare because it includes virus is a treatment for rabies, which is called Milwaukee protocol. Rabies is the virus that infects neurons and travels through the neurons in so-called anterograde fashion to the brain. When we normal, 37, it goes to the brain pretty fast, about a week if you were bitten in the leg, and in a matter of a day or two if you're bitten in the face. Milwaukee protocol includes, when a person already has rabies, it's too late to vaccinate against post-exposure. The person is cooled down to the core temperature of 22 degrees Celsius, whopping 22. Basically, it's like 72 degrees Fahrenheit. And then they treat it with different drugs and blah, 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 and they stay like this for several months, and then they recover. There were 2 patients in the United States that were treated against rabies and recovered. By recovered, I mean they didn't die. They still experienced stroke-like symptoms afterwards, but at least they survived. Okay? So during the open heart surgery, it is used. Generally, you can revive patients who were cooled down. And we'll talk about the regulation of the body temperature. Now, what regulates blood and skin? So how do we get warmer? Well, we normally do this. We shiver. When we experience cold, our thyroxine levels go up. Okay? Does that make sense? And we also constrict blood vessels to retain heat inside. Okay, when we get hot, there are two basic, honestly, there are two basic mechanisms. One is sweating, evaporative cooling, right? And two is dilation of blood vessels, to dissipate the heat through the blood vessels of the skin. Does that make sense? When you see dogs in the hot weather, when they breathe really rapidly through the mouth, they do essentially evaporative cooling. Because they can't really cool through the skin, they have to cool through the mouth. Okay. Now, the thermostat, the nest of your body is hypothalamus. Normally it is set on 37, okay? When you are exposed to the heat, okay, the core temperature increases, the blood vessels in the skin dilate, and you start to sweat. So your core temperature decreases. Makes perfect sense. Okay? And when it's freezing, your blood vessels constrict, your muscles start to contract. That's why, when you call, can you go for a run now? You can, and if you will walk out, you will be freezing. But if you run vigorously, in a matter of minutes, you're going to be just fine because you produce so much heat. Does that make sense? And that's normal regulation, normal physiological regulation. Hypothalamus has the center. Now, what happens in hyperthermia? In hyperthermia, hypothalamus is inhibited, just suppressed. Its activity is suppressed. Imagine this, your thermostat stops working. When your body temperature in this situation increases, how does temperature of the body influences BMR? Increases BMR. Increased BMR means that you produce more heat. You become hotter, your BMR increases, you produce more heat. You become hotter, your BMR increases, and that leads to the heat stroke. Does that make sense? Before we talk about, I need to reorder this to make it more fluid. Now, what is the other condition? When you become feverish. Come on. When you develop fever. No, you don't? No. Lucky you. Huh? When? When you're feverish. When you're sick. Okay, now, when you're sick, the mechanism is different. When you're sick, you develop inflammation. That's normal response. Either your immune system or actually a bacteria, they will produce chemicals that will act on your hypothalamus. Those chemicals are called pyrogens. And they will reset the thermostat. Now imagine, for a second, my thermostat now is set for 37. Okay? Hypothetically, I'm infected, I produce pyrogens. And my thermostat right now, right this second, is set not on 37, which I'm now, but at 39. How does hypothalamus, with that changed setting, perceives, what does it have to do now? If the setting is at 39, I'm still at 37. What am I supposed to do? increase body temperature by increasing BMR. How? Huh? How can I increase my body temperature right now? Shiver. I'm going to start shivering. What else? Blood vessel, people. Constrict. So when the person develops fever, they have chills and they pale. Does that make sense? So basically, when, like, if you have if I'm feverish, if I'm sick and I have chills, what is my immediate wish? I want to wrap myself in a blanket. The purpose of it is to bring it up to the temperature my hypothalamus sets me at. Okay, what do we take for fever? Huh? Tylenol, ibuprofen, okay? What they do, they either inhibit the production of pyrogens. It's mostly they actually inhibit production of pyrogen, like aspirin, yeah. Metabolites over arachidonic acid. So you do not produce pyrogens, and it resets your thermostat back to 37. Does that make sense? You don't receive, hypothalamus does not receive signals for the higher settings. Compare fever and heat stroke. In heat stroke, there are no chemicals. In heat stroke, aspirin, Tylenol, ibuprofen, will they work? They will not, because the mechanism is not chemical, it's physical pretty much. So what is the treatment for heat stroke? Cool down a person. Anything. Ice packets. When you have a person with heat stroke, where do you apply ice packets? Huh? Armpits. If you have enough, core. If you have just 2, armpits. Wet towels. Now, water, does it have to be, water, ideally, interestingly enough, has to be lukewarm to evaporate the fastest, okay, to produce that response as fast as it can. And the cohort that is most prone to heat strokes, the athletes. They often run themselves to death. A year ago, there was a situation in Kent State University, you may have heard about it, when football coaches ran a kid to death during the practice in the summer because they didn't take complaints seriously. And you have to be serious about complaints. And if you coach children, you have to know what the heat index is. For instance, when people say it's a humid summer here, give me a break. We used to practice in Louisiana in the summer. That's humid. The heat index is terrible. Say 80% humidity and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It extends to about 110, 116 heat index. Okay? Highest heat index ever recorded is 171, I think, in Saudi Arabia, which means it feels like 171 Fahrenheit. You can die in a matter of an hour if you're out there, you know. Seriously, just die. Just like being in sauna for an extended period of time, which is pretty bad. So hyperthermia is bad, really bad. I saw a person getting heat stroke in Louisiana in freaking April or March. There was a half marathon. The guy got a heat stroke like in April. And it was mere like 26 Celsius, like 80. But it was really, really humid. Heat index was way up. There you go. So you have to be really careful about it. Now, what about hypothermia? Hypothermia is much better. First of all, it's the most comfortable death known. Because when people cool down, the activity of all body organs declines. And what's important, the activity of the brain decreases. And basically sensory perception decreases and people stop sensing that they overcooling. And they sit down, and think, yeah, I'm going to sit for a couple of minutes. I'm really tired. It's a little bit cold. They fall asleep, basically, and never wake up. They freeze to death. How do we know that it's comfortable? Because you can bring people back to life from that condition. There's a medical expression, dead until you're warm and dead. Okay, paramedics here know that. Now, don't take it like you find a frozen corpse outside and you bring it in and the person, miraculously rises and walks again. No. If person experienced the heart attack and died and then the corpse froze, no, that's that. Person's dead anyway. But here in Ohio, there was a case when a woman was scooped off the ground. When I say scooped off the ground, it meant she froze to the ground. Her core temperature was 26 Celsius. The emergency team had to use shovels. They couldn't lift her. They had to, lever her from the ground. She was frozen to the ground. She was recovered without no neurological damage. She lost some, fingers because of the frostbite, but other than that, she was completely recovered. Also, another difference in terms of hypothermia, which type of hypothermia you want, fast or slow? Well, fast. If you cool down fast, it's easier to recover. So, again, here in the city of Cleveland, Ohio, common cause of hypothermia, people fall in the Lake Erie. And especially in the winter or in the fall, it's a fast hypothermia. In the same sort of line of thinking, what was the main cause of death of passengers of Titanic? Very little of them really drowned. Most of them died first of hypothermia and then drowned. Basically, they didn't notice how they were drowning. If you are history aficionado and you read about polar convoys from England to Soviet Union, when they were attacked by Germans, by Nazis, sailors who ended up sailors knew that if you spend more than 2 minutes in the water, which was about 4 degrees Celsius, 38, 39, you toast, you're done. Even if you recovered, you will die because they didn't have means to warm up people. Okay, that's what people died the most. They didn't drown. They froze to death in the water. But it's, much better death, sort of. So this is the overview. I'm not going to go over the hormones. Okay, does that make sense? Now we're going to wrap it up. I'm going to go grab the quizzes, bring them to you, give them to you. I told you I'll compensate for this 5 minutes that I hold you back. Next class, we're going to start with a review of the quiz and review of the study guides. Okay? We good?